My name is Kevin Collion, and I run multiple businesses generating over 8 figures annually. I'm the owner and broker of Gold Star Premier Properties, the owner of Gold Star Floors. I run a fix and flip and new construction and development business, and I'm also in the financing industry. What I don't like to do is brag. I like to work. That's why they call me the Silent Mogul. On today's podcast, I'm happy to have with us Mr. Arthur Ettinger. How are you doing today, Arthur?
I'm great.
I've had the privilege of meeting Arthur on last week's episode when we did the podcast with Miss Christina Shaw, and it was a true pleasure meeting you. You shared with me some great information, and I wanted to talk to you about that today so we can give our audience some good insights on what we discussed.
Great. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. So furthermore, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. My name is Arthur Ettinger. I am a matrimonial lawyer. I run the family law group at Greenspoon, Marder. We are a full-service law firm, approximately 250 lawyers around the country, and I run the family law group here in New York.
That's amazing. So first, I want to know personally, how did you get into this industry?
That's a great question. It's not like I woke up and said, oh, I want to be a divorce lawyer. I don't know too many people that do that, but my dad was a matrimonial lawyer.
Okay.
And I thought I didn't want to do this kind of work. I went to go work for a prominent banking firm after he had fallen ill. I thought I didn't want to do it. I went to work at this banking firm, and I realized really quickly that I missed working with individuals and helping families. You know, you save Chase, you save a big bank hundreds of millions of dollars. At the end of the day, it's not changing an individual's life. And so I missed that aspect. And so I went back into family law, and I've been practicing family law ever since for about 25 years.
That's 100% true. The impact you have on an individual is much greater than the impact you have on one of these big corporations. So I want to know, and I've put out a poll on my social media where the people that follow me have a list of questions that they wanted me to ask you.
Oh,
so
great.
If you don't mind, I
would
love to start off with the first question, which is, are there different stages to a divorce?
There most definitely are different stages. There's the beginning stage, okay? There's discovery, and then there's the end, which is trial.
Okay.
Okay. Most cases never see the inside of a courtroom. Most cases don't see a trial. I happen to practice high conflict divorce, so I'm in court fairly regularly.
Got it.
But there's still stages. There's the beginning where you're gathering information. The parties may be meeting with a judge or a mediator with their lawyers, assistants, and you're trying to crystallize issues, okay? And then there's discovery, and in that discovery phase, you're gathering documents, you may be valuing assets, you may be, like a home. If there's a home, it needs to be appraised. If there's a business, let's say a closely held business, a forensic accountant needs to come in and valued. There may be child-related issues like custody, and if that's not resolved, the court's going to appoint an attorney to represent the children. There may be a forensic psychologist brought in to figure out and help the court figure out what's best for the children. So it all depends on what the facts and circumstances are in the divorce, which will dictate the different stages, whether the parties are going to mediate. Not every case is mediation worthy. It takes, listen, just like in every dispute, it takes 4 people to resolve a case.
Understood. 2
normal litigants, 2 spouses, and then 2 normal lawyers, rational and reasonable individuals. And it doesn't always align like that, certainly in the beginning. That we're talking about emotions, and emotions are high in a divorce. And when emotions are high, people don't always make the most sensible decisions.
Absolutely. I have 2 follow-up questions to that. The first question is, does the judge take into account who's the wrong party in the divorce. Say, for example, if there was infidelity or abuse or anything like that, does the judge use that as motivation to kind of side with one party over the other?
So that's a good question. New York is not a fault state.
Oh, wow.
So the fact that you had an affair out of the marriage, that will not come into play on the economics or on the custody. Having said that, and I know you asked also abuse. Let's put abuse off to a side for a second. If we're talking about, let's say, an extramarital affair, it's not going to come into play on dividing the assets. However, it can be a factor on the financial component. For example, if the person who had the affair is now spending monies on that paramour, the significant other. Let's say they're going on trips with that person. They're buying jewelry and watches, and they're using those marital funds for the extramarital affair. That money is going to come back in to the marital estate for purposes of dividing.
Got it.
Okay. Similarly, on the child-related issues, if that, if one of the spouses is bringing their significant other around the kids, it's going to come into play. Okay. But most courts don't care about affairs. They've heard it before. They're going to hear it again. And here in New York, it's really not going to be much of an issue. Now, you also asked about abuse. Okay. Abuse can be a factor. If the question is, what kind of abuse are we talking about? Is this physical abuse? Is this emotional abuse? It most likely is not going to impact, again, the economics. It may impact the child-related issues and how the court's going to determine the custody issues, where the children are going to reside, or how those major decisions, major health, major educational decisions are going to be decided, if one person's going to have sole custody versus joint custody. The only time fault really comes into play in the economics, other than the dissipation claim that I spoke about previously, we have a concept here in New York called egregious fault. Okay? It has to be so egregious that the court is going to award a larger portion of the assets. And the case, the seminal case, is Havel versus Islam, and really what it is the husband took a bat to his wife's head. If you don't have the factors that rise to that level, courts really are not going to be concerned about the fault and the abuse.
If you're going to get to that point where you're going to have to lift a bat or any kind of object on your spouse, why not just separate and go your separate ways? I mean, I just don't understand how certain people think. You know?
Well, yeah, listen, a lot of people do crazy things and they don't think about ramifications, and because of that, that's why I have a job.
That's a great job to have. It's very emotional. It's actually a highly emotional job on both parties. And the second follow-up question to the original topic was, you stated that the court appoints somebody to look after the situation of the child. So I'm assuming that once they're under 18, the court will make the decision as to who gets joint custody or full custody of the child.
So actually, it's a little bit different. As the child gets older, if the child is, let's say, 1 or 2, most of the time the court's not appointing an attorney for the child. The attorney for the child, the concept is the child has a voice, and the voice should be heard in the proceedings. Okay, so that attorney will articulate the wishes of the child. So obviously a 1-year-old or 2-year-old is not going to articulate their wishes. As the kids get older, to your point, then they're more able to articulate what they want. And it's only just a factor. There are many different factors that the court looks at when the court has to determine what's in the best interest. The child's preference only being one of them. But it's not 18. It's typically, when we get to 16, 17, a court's not even entertaining custody. A child or children, they can vote with their feet, and they're going to decide where they want to go. 17, the court is not going to even entertain the issue of custody.
Okay. What are some of those other factors that go into play other than the child's input? What are the judges looking at?
Well, the test in New York, and it's in most states, the test is a very vague, it's a best interest analysis.
Okay.
And that can look like a lot of different things. It could look like who has been doing most of the heavy lifting beforehand, what each party, each parent's role has been beforehand, if both parents are working versus, let's say, one parent has been home caring for the children, the other person has a very demanding job. It could, one of the issues could be, there could be substance abuse, addiction. That's going to factor into how a court handles decision making going forward, or access. Pathology, like I said before, oftentimes a court will appoint the forensic psychologist to figure out what's actually going on, and you'll hear about the strengths and weaknesses of each parent. One parent may suffer some mental illness which will affect their ability to parent. Similarly, a physical illness. If a parent is confined, let's say, to a wheelchair, and it's not the end-all be-all, they still can care for their children. And I've had several cases where my clients were bound to a wheelchair, but they had joint custody and they had joint decision making, but they were able to demonstrate that they had a support structure to help them. God forbid something was needed that they physically could not handle because of their handicap.
Got it. I heard you also mention that the division of the assets is one of the most crucial parts in a divorce proceeding. But for the purposes of this podcast, being that I deal with a lot of clients that ask me this specific question, which I'm going to hand off to you because it's your expertise, how does a divorce directly affect real estate?
That's a great question, and we could probably have a 2-hour podcast alone on that. There are so many issues.
I'm not sure Rafe will allow that.
There are so many issues that come up in the context of a divorce with real estate. Okay, first we have the division. You have the division of the asset, but there's also exclusive use and occupancy.
Okay.
Okay, it's very hard to get exclusive use and occupancy of the primary residence, the main home where everybody lives. But a lot of people have country homes. They have a house, a ski house. They have a house in the Hamptons. The court's not going to grant exclusive use and occupancy of a country home. Parties may be sharing it. Okay. Then there's the issue of how are we going to dispose of the real estate. There's only so many options on disposing of real estate. Either one person's going to buy the other person out, or you're going to sell. Now, if you sell, you may not be selling right then and there. You may be selling at a time down the road. For example, if there are 2 kids and they're 5 and 7, and this is the only home they've ever known, the court's inclined to keep them in that home because it's more disruptive to now sell it, and they're now going to go to another home, okay, or 2 homes for that matter. So the court may say, wait a second, if we can keep these kids in the home and one parent, depending on what the child support or the spouse's support or whatever their financial circumstances, if I can keep the kids in the home, the court may say, I'm going to, and the phrase, it's a Latin phrase, parens patriae, taking the place as the parent, as the judge, okay, I'm going to not disturb that situation, and we'll sell maybe when that youngest child goes off to college. So the parties now are figuring out how they're going to be carrying the monthly nut, okay, from the time after they get divorced until the youngest goes off to college. Who's going to be paying the mortgage? Who's getting the tax deduction? Who's paying, God forbid, there are capital improvements that need to get done. So you have that issue. Now, then you may have the sale going on right now while the divorce is pending. Now, the courts can't order the sale of the marital residence, especially if it's held as joint tenants but in entirety, okay, because they're still married. The court can't dispose of that until there's no longer a marriage.
Got it.
Okay? So now, if you have two people who have two different interests, one person may not want the divorce. Okay? It takes two to tango, but only one person needs to have a divorce. Okay? Or want a divorce. So if you have a situation where one person wants to stay in the home, the other person wants to sell, let's say the case is over, and if there's a stipulation and it's very vague on how we're going to deal with the marital residence being sold, the person that continues to reside there, okay, let's say it's the husband, he doesn't want to move because who wants to move? Everybody hates to move.
Yeah.
So now, if you don't have certain belts and suspenders drafted in your settlement document, then you can, the person living there can be incentivized to, let's say, prevent the broker from coming in to show the property.
Okay.
Or they can just delay. Or they can say, you know what, I don't agree on the price. So there's a lot of different points and issues that can be put in a document to prevent this and to disincentivize one of the spouses from dragging their feet to make sure that there's going to be a prompt sale. Agreeing on the broker, so there's no fight about who's going to be the broker. Agreeing on the real estate lawyer. The last thing you want as the real estate broker, your interest, you're representing the property. Your goal is to get the best possible price for these two people. Well, that may not be aligned with both of the parties, or it only may be aligned with one. Conversely, you may be in a really hard position because now you have to deal with both of these people. You represent both of them. So let's say you send an email to only one person because they're the only person on title. In New York, equitable distribution is regardless of title. Okay, both people have an interest in that marital residence, but you need to be emailing both of the parties so now the other spouse doesn't feel like you're in their pocket.
Could you have a broker representing the wife's interest and a separate broker representing the husband's?
100%. We do that all the time.
Okay.
You know, and then there are oftentimes what I'll do is I'll say rather than have two people because it just you're less incentivized.
Yep.
Because now you have to take a haircut to share it with somebody else, only to, you know, lament with another broker, oh my God, these people can't even agree that today is Friday. So what I'll often do is I'll say, okay, if we can't agree on a broker, the husband will pick a broker, the spouse will pick a broker, and those two people will pick a third broker. But yes, we do that all the time.
So is it fair to assume, and I think you touched on it, but I just want to have clarity for everybody that's looking or viewing this podcast, that New York is not a 50-50 state and that the assets are agreed upon by both parties and then divided as such?
So there's a lot in there to unpack. So we're not equal, we're equitable.
Okay.
It's equitable distribution.
Got it.
Okay, so that doesn't necessarily mean equal. Having said that, usually, so there's a lot of different factors that come into play. It's the contributions, it's the length of the marriage, are there children? There are some judges that take the position, once there are kids, I'm automatically dividing the assets 50-50. But different assets are treated differently.
Okay.
A business interests are not 50-50. There's only very few circumstances where it's 50-50. Typically those assets, best case scenario for the non-title spouse is a third. But then you have joint bank accounts, those are typically 50-50. But if one person's gonna show that they've done all the heavy lifting, there's a lot of different, there's significant contributions on their part, and the other person really hasn't done much, and it's a short-term marriage, then no, it's not going to be 50.
You're going to tip the scale according to how much they contributed over
right,
that
and
period of time.
the court has a lot of discretion on this. It becomes a negotiation with the parties and their lawyers. But long-term marriage, children, both parties kind of working, yeah, it's going to be 50-50.
Got it. So another question that was brought to me on social media was, if someone is contemplating divorce and they wanted to interview different divorce attorneys like yourself, what are some questions they should ask that attorney, or what are some documents that they should bring for you to evaluate to see where they stand and weigh out and provide the best interest and knowledge to them?
So the first thing I would say, and I tell this to everybody who comes in my door, we're not in a one-horse town, okay? Go meet with a bunch of different people, okay? See who you like. I joke, lawyers are like dogs and their owners, you know? You tend to look like your dog after a while, and it's the same thing for lawyers. You know, if you want a pit bull, you're going to get, and no pun intended.
Yeah.
You know, you want a pit bull lawyer, you know, go get a pit bull lawyer. Some people, not everybody wants a pit bull, and not everybody needs a pit bull. Okay, you have to figure out what works best for you, and what is going to work best when you're at a negotiation table with your spouse. It's also to understand their objective, and so that they hear you, that lawyer. It's also the financial circumstances are important. If you make $30,000 a year, you shouldn't be interviewing lawyers that are $900 an hour. That
Absolutely.
just doesn't make sense. It's a waste of time. What documents to bring? Bring tax returns. Bring your financial statements. You don't necessarily have to bring anything to your first meeting.
Consultation.
You have to feel comfortable with the person. This is going to be probably the worst, if not one of the worst times in your life. Even the easy, amicable divorces are not fun and can be gut-wrenching. And so you need to be comfortable with that person. You can have a follow-up meeting and start bringing those financial papers, okay? The one thing I would say, if you're living with your spouse and there are documents that you're concerned about, let's say you're making a separate property claim on the marital residence because you brought to the table a lot of assets and you contributed, let's say, the entire down payment, and there's that folder in the library, in the office, in the house, or wherever, take that, bring that in, and make sure there's a copy made, because a lot of those important documents magically disappear once you blow the whistle that this marriage is over.
That's definitely great advice. And another question to follow up with that is, what's the process of going through or getting a prenup? And do you recommend for the average Joe making $30,000 a year, or somebody who's in a better position making $3 million a year? Does one separate the other, or do you recommend a prenup for everybody, or to each his own?
So here's what I say about a prenup. I'm a strong proponent of prenups, but not every case is the same, okay? What may be right for you may not be right for me.
Correct.
Okay, and certainly if it's your second marriage and you have children, hands down, there should be a prenup. The fact that the person makes $30,000 a year doesn't automatically mean that you shouldn't get one. The main thing that I think with someone like that, let's say their spouse also makes $30,000 a year, what you're doing is you're crystallizing the issues down the road. So you don't have to pay ridiculous sums of money to people like myself. You could avoid expert fees and lawyers' fees. So, because if the relationship goes sideways and now you have an angry, emotional spouse, like we talked about before, and they're gonna start fighting over nonsense for the sake of fighting, okay, this document at least will have prevented that from happening. But it's all fact intensive. It depends upon the circumstances of both parties. But generally speaking, at the very least, you have to consult with a competent family law attorney so you can figure out if it makes sense for you. I think it's a misconception that a prenup is going to take away the romance of a relationship. What it actually is going to do, it's going to open up the dialogue with you and your fiance, which the only way a relationship is going to last, and I know this personally because I've made my mistakes in my own personal life, is to be able to be transparent and open up dialogue and talk about the hard stuff.
Absolutely, and I do thank you for putting your own personal experiences on the forefront for everybody to kind of look
Sure.
at and pull what they want to pull away from it. But what are the costs for a prenup for someone like myself who does not know?
So it's whether it's a divorce, a prenup, a custody case, it's all a function of time.
Okay.
Okay. It all depends how basic the document's going to be. So I can't tell you what the average cost of a prenup is going, It all depends also on the lawyer. If you have a lawyer drafting at $200 an hour, or you have a lawyer doing it at $750 an hour, the costs are going to be different. You can drive down, the LIE, you can see those signs, $600 divorce.
It's $3.99 in the boroughs.
Exactly. Cheap is expensive, and I've consulted, people have come into my office because they paid next to nothing, and I have to clean up the mess.
I understand, and you're 100% right. Cheap is expensive, not only in your line of work, but in any line of work. I mean, cheap isn't sweet, not all the time. But I want to ask you this question, and feel free to be honest and tell me if you don't want to answer it or not.
Go
But
for it.
I just want to ask you, based off your experience and your knowledge and your past experiences,
Sure.
What would you say to somebody that's looking at this podcast right now and is completely miserable in their situation, their marital situation, but uses the term that I'm in it for my kids?
I hear this all the time, and I've seen this, and I think, and I can say this not only as a matrimonial practitioner for 25 years, but also as somebody who has lived it. It is, to me, the biggest disservice you can give to your children by staying miserable in the house. And one of the things we are as parents are role models to our children. And if you think the better role model is to be screaming and yelling at the other spouse, the other parent of your kids, we're trying to shape our children to teach them how one day they should be children and parents. And if it's okay to be fighting in front of them, or to, or conversely, to not hold your spouse's hand and say, I love you, versus showing how happy you or your spouse is, but separately in different homes. Like, it's okay to, there used to be such a stigma, and I think it's much more accepted to be divorced now and to live in separate homes. Kids in first grade, second grade, at young age, there's a ton of kids. You look at the school list, and there's many different phone numbers and emails
Emergency
for different
contacts,
parents, and it's much more accepted. It's not like taboo. It's okay. I hear it all the time. Oh my God, and I went through this also as a matrimonial lawyer. Oh my God, what is this going to do to my kids? The kids are going to be okay. The kids are going to be well adjusted if they know that both parents are happy and that they love them, versus staying in a house being absolutely miserable.
I wouldn't say it's widely accepted, because in my culture specifically, it's very taboo. So, I mean, I don't know what the exact number is, but I heard it on the news channel the other day that I think the divorce rate in America was like 50%, whereas in the West Indian community, it's much, much lower than that. And the reason I wanted to sit with you today, and we talked last week about it, and Christina also weighed in on it, is that in our specific culture, a spouse would rather put up with domestic abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, infidelity, and just stay in that relationship for the betterment of their children, and in hopes that they could change their spouse over time and that they will see their flaws and try to correct themselves. So it's difficult for me to accept that it's widely accepted.
That's fair, and that's a definitely a valid point. When I say culture as a whole, Western culture.
Got
Yes, it is true, and I've represented those people. I've had clients. I had an Asian client a few years back, sitting in my office, cry, literally with black and blues all over their body, and her husband had an open an affair and a relationship for many, many years, and she sat and cried and said she never wanted to get divorced, and it was against her culture to get divorced.
Yeah.
And she was saying, figure out whatever way you can to keep me to stay together. And ultimately, it was really sad. She went home. She went back home to Tokyo, and then she never came back.
Yeah.
She killed herself.
It's a tough pill to swallow, but being that you see it every day, you see it either in the community that you live in, or you see it on the news, or you hear, like, you see somebody's picture that they passed away on social media, but you knew what they were going through internally. It's tough to accept that somebody is willing to put themselves through that turmoil and not just walk away because they feel like they're trapped because of, a cultural stigma.
Sure. This is a really sensitive subject.
Yeah.
And
which is why I wanted to have it.
And I don't know, like, what's best is for, like I said before, for one person may be different than for somebody else. But I think it's really important, no matter what culture you're in, no matter what your religious beliefs are, is to go and get some help and support from somebody else, no matter how hard or easy the divorce may be in your head. You need to go, and I'm not talking about friends. It's great to talk to friends,
yeah,
but you should talk to a therapist to get some help, because life is not easy. And then a breakup of a family certainly is not easy. And I think, though, the people, like you said, in your culture that may be dead set against going through a divorce, it would behoove them to speak to a therapist who's trained to deal with this. And listen, there's those people that say, I don't believe in therapy.
Yeah.
But it's also, you have to weigh what are the benefits? Is it worth, your physical well-being and your physical safety? The kids are going to be messed up.
Yeah.
Whether you think just because everyone's under the same roof, those kids are going to be affected so detrimentally for so many years, and you're going to be, for no other reason but staying together, they're going to have to get their own therapy.
Well, Arthur, this was definitely a heavy topic. I did want to have it because I know there's so many people out there that are living this situation as we speak. But I do appreciate you giving your honest and professional opinion on this specific topic and not shying away from the question itself. And as we wrap up the podcast, I mean, there's really, one final question I do want to ask you, which I do ask everybody that sits across from me. But your business is a little different, so I'll try to rephrase the question. Normally, I would ask, how has COVID impacted your business, whether positive or negative? But for your line of work, I would say, have you seen COVID impact the divorce rate? Has the divorce rate increased because people are spending so much time together under the same roof because of COVID, and they're bickering more?
So yes to all of that.
Yeah.
Okay. The divorce rate actually went down.
Oh, okay.
Okay. During the pandemic, so did marriages. I used to joke, people are getting, married in their backyard and divorced in their living room, literally.
Yeah.
And I have, with the pivoting and the courts closed, I was literally logging in remotely, and it's still very much virtually all virtual. I have seen the underbelly of people, okay, as a result of the pandemic. There has been widespread domestic violence, okay, and it's really scary. So the pandemic has affected matrimonial lawyers in so many ways. I am constantly putting out fires and dealing with really horrible issues. There's been, and with the loosening of bail laws, and cops not being able to do a lot of things. I've seen clients, being beaten and the cops their hands being tied on
Yeah.
what to do. Lot of orders of protection. While the divorce rates went down, and so did marriages went down, domestic violence was through the roof. And now people are fighting, just like all you need to do is log on to Facebook to see how divided our society is. This person wants a vaccine, this person refuses a vaccine. It's become so political, and that has eroded into the court process. And now clients and parents and litigants are fighting over whether to vaccinate children and who is the more appropriate parent to, let's say, the children should reside in my house because it's safer, and or should we homeschool versus remote learning versus in person and hybrid, and the court has seen so much of that.
Yeah.
And now with courts opening, there has been the courts were backlogged before we had the pandemic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And now it's even worse. We filed papers and the judges still have not dealt with it. They're still trying to get through the emergency motion. So people with significant resources trying to file a motion that they think is an emergency, courts are barely. They're trying to get through it and they're not. And it is certainly affected how we are practicing law.
And I see that question kind of, it's very emotional for you to answer, because I know it weighs heavily on you to see so many people going through it physically in their house, and in the courts kind of having their backs against the wall because it's, everything is virtual or things are shut down for a period of time. But I know that you do and will always do the right thing by the person that's sitting directly across from you. And if there's somebody out there that wants to have a consultation or reach you directly, what's the best way to do that?
My phone number is 212-524-5002. That's my direct dial. And you can certainly email me as well at Arthur, ARTHUR Ettinger, ETTINGER @gmlaw.com. You can also hit me up if you prefer social media at Arthur Ettinger on Instagram and Facebook. As a courtesy to you, any of your listeners or your clients, they're having a hard time or they just want to ask me a question, at your disposal.
I appreciate that, and I really do want to thank you.
Thank you for
coming out and doing this podcast. Arthur also has a podcast on Instagram called Close to the Vest. Please check it out. If you have any comments, questions, please hit it on the comment section below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you on the next podcast. Take care.